Hello class, receiving students and teachers.
Hello, Miss Irma.
Thank you. You may sit down. All right, class, receiving students. Let's look at what we're going to do in today's lesson. All right, our lesson topic for today, as I told you in our previous lesson, that we're going to be looking at simple equivalent ratio. Okay, receiving students, simple equivalent ratio. Now, in our previous lesson, we looked at ratio. Receiving students, can you tell the class what is ratio? Or what did you learn about ratio in your previous lesson? Class, just tell us, what did you learn? What did you learn about ratio? Was there anything that you learned with ratio? Receiving students, please tell your teacher what you learned about ratio in your previous lesson or in our previous lesson. Now let's have Oa. Can you tell us what did you learn about ratio?
A ratio is a comparison of two quantities.
Okay, thank you, Oa. All right. Oa says ratio is a comparison of two quantities. Okay, good. Remember in our previous lesson, we looked at two sets of markers. What colors were they? Okay, receiving students, red and blue. And how many red markers were there? All right, there were 4 red markers. And how many how many black markers were there? There were 5. So 4 red markers, and there were 5 black markers. So you compared those number of red markers to the number of black markers, which was 4:5. So ratio is when you are comparing two quantities. Okay, very good. And we also looked at, receiving students, you also looked at ways of how to write ratio, right? Ways of how to write ratio. So I'm sure, receiving students, you looked at those ways. You had different ways of writing ratio. Okay, good. Now in today's lesson, simple equivalent ratio. Let's look at some of the points when we are looking at simple equivalent ratio. All right. Okay, what does it say about equivalent ratio? Okay, equivalent ratio. Can I have Ashanti? Can you read the first point, please? Receiving students, I'd like a volunteer to read the first point, please, on your screen. So Shanti, let's have Vanessa. It's the first point.
Equivalent ratio may be formed by multiplication or division of both sides of the ratio by the same number.
Okay, thank you, Vanessa. All right. Equivalent ratios may be formed by multiplication or division of both sides of the ratio by the same number. All right, or in other words, we can say, in order to get an equivalent ratio, you can multiply or divide, okay, both sides of the ratio by a common factor, or same number. All right? Okay, who can read the next point for us? All right, as we go along, we'll look at some examples of how to get equivalent ratio. All right, the second point, let's have Onea. Onea, can you read, please? The second point, receiving students, let's have one volunteer to read loud and clear.
Simplest equivalent ratio. Divide both sides of the ratio with a common factor.
Okay, thank you, Onea. To get the simplest equivalent ratio, you are to divide both sides of the ratio with a common factor or a same number. Now, we're going to look at an example each of these two. How to get an equivalent ratio and how to get the simplest equivalent ratio. Okay, let's look at an equivalent ratio. Class, everyone, receiving students, write an equivalent ratio for 2:3. Okay, write an equivalent ratio for 2:3. Now remember, in order for you to get an equivalent ratio, you are going to either multiply or you are going to divide. So here, in order for us to get an equivalent ratio that is equivalent, meaning equal to this ratio, 2:3. So who can tell me which number did we, what operation did we use in order to get an equivalent ratio of 2:3? Class? What operation, meaning operation sign? What did we use? Multiplication, division, or what? Okay, we used multiplication or times. So here, 2:3, we times by what number? All right, very good. We times by 2. So can you see, class? Look closely. 2:3, so I times 2 times 2, okay? 2 times 2, and also don't forget 3. You must also multiply it by 2, the same number. You multiply this number by 2, you also multiply this number by 2. So 2 times 2 is 4, 3 times 2 is 6. So 4:6 is equal to 2:3, or it's equivalent to 2:3. Class, are you with me? Receiving students? Okay. So, in order to write an equivalent ratio of another ratio, you can multiply or you divide. But here we are multiplying. You can multiply by any number, but it must be same. Same on one side of the ratio and also same on the other side. Okay, let's look at the other example. Now, this time we're going to look at how to get a simple equivalent ratio. Okay, let's have a look. Receiving students, write the simple equivalent ratio for 12:40. Class, receiving students, 12:40. Okay, here it says write the simple equivalent ratio. Simple equivalent ratio, in other words, the simplest. Remember in our previous lesson, we said that simplest means you break down. Now you bring down to the lowest ratio, okay? So 12:40, what operation am I using? Are we using here? Okay, we are dividing. Class, receiving students, we are dividing. Remember, one side of the ratio must be, you divide by the same number. you also do with the other side of the ratio with the same number. So here we are dividing by 2 first, okay? So 12 divided by 2 is 6, all right? 40 divided by 2 is 20, okay? 40 divided by 2 is 20. But you see, I can still, 6 is to 20 is an equivalent fraction, but it's not brought down to the simplest form yet, class? So I have to look for another number again to divide, so I can bring it down. So what number will I divide again by the 2? 2, 2, okay, so let's try. 6 divided by 2 is 3. 20 divided by 2 is 10. So you see, now our simplest form or simplest ratio now is 3 is to 10. So that's the simplest ratio for 12 is to 40. Remember, it's just like fraction, class. It's just the same as fraction. When you are bringing down or you're simplifying, it's just the same, but same also with ratio. Okay, class, receiving students? So if you want to get the simplest equivalent ratio, you divide, you bring down, okay? All right, I'm going to let you do some activities by yourselves, class, and then we'll correct them later on, okay? So receiving students, your exercise. Okay, for this one, number 1, write at least 3 equivalent ratios of the following. A, 3 is to 5. You write 3 equivalent ratios that is equal to 3 is to 5. Same with B and C. Write 3 for each. I'd like you to work in your groups, please. Work in your groups so you can get your answers faster, quickly. Receiving students? For this exercise, write at least 3 equivalent ratios for A, B, and C. Now, I'd like you to work in your groups. Work in your groups to get your answers quickly, okay? So this is question 1. You also have question 2. In your groups, please discuss how you are going to get your the equivalent ratios for each. So once you've copied that, I'll go back to the learning activity, okay, on equivalent ratio. Wait, I tried 60. Wait, I tried 60. Wait, I tried 60. Wait, I tried 60. Please, if you are not sure, please ask class, receiving students, ask your teachers for help. Please talk with your friends, discuss with your friends, okay? Don't just sit down and think that you know everything. How are you going to get equivalent ratio for 3:5? Remember, you're going to get at least 3, okay? 3 for each. So how are you going to get 3 equivalent ratios for 3:5? B, 1:3, and C, 5:6. Yeah, you can times. Yeah, you times. Times is better than dividing. Because if you divide, you cannot divide. You cannot divide by. You cannot divide by number because it won't give you an even number. You see. Okay, good. So this is 1. That's 1. Okay, but I said 3, so you get 2 more. Yeah, 2 more. Okay, this for now. This one is okay, but it's still the same.
Yeah.
So you can get another number to multiply by. Okay. Any number. You are multiplying, so it's okay. Okay, class, listen. If you cannot write 3, just write at least 1, okay? Just write at least 1 equivalent ratio for each, okay? And maybe for your homework, you can maybe write the other 2, okay? So if you wrote 1 equivalent ratio for each, that's still okay, good. Very good, yes. But this one is like it's still the same. 1:3 and 1:3. Can you multiply by a different number instead of multiplying by 1? Because you still get the same ratio. Okay, but this one is still the same. 1:3 and 1:3. Can you get multiplied by a different number? Okay, but this one you can multiply by a different number to get an equal ratio. Instead of multiplying by 1, you look for 2, or you multiply by 3. 2 is 10. Okay, 6 and 3, so okay. Then you leave it as it is, this one. 10 is to 12. That's an equivalent ratio. Because you only multiply. Okay, this one divide is when you simplify. But this one you multiply by 2, this one you multiply by 2, okay, that leave it as it is. Then you rub this one off, this other off. This one just leave it. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Enough. I hope. Okay. Good. You finished with exercise A? Writing equivalent ratios. Okay, now the other exercise. Okay, this time, receiving students, class, you are going to find the simplest equivalent ratio of the following. 9 is to 27, B, 16 is to 56, and 30 is to 36. Okay? The simplest form. Okay? In simplest form. So this time, again, discuss with your group. This time, what are you going to do? Are you going to multiply? Are you going to divide? So quickly get your answers down. Or make sure you show how you get your answer. Okay. Now, what I meant was, you see, you cannot, because if it's 1 divided by 1, you still end up with 1 is to 3. 1 is to 3 is 1 is to 3. That's, okay. So here you're going to multiply, you're going to times. But you don't times by 1, you times by another number like 2 or 3. So instead of 1, if you multiply by 1, you still get the same. Okay? But you don't want it to get the same one. You must get another that is equal to 1 is to 3. So here you're not going to divide, you're going to times. Yes. Okay. 1 times 2 is 2, 3 times 2. Yeah, that's right. Okay, so for this one, I'll go back to the learning example on how to get simplest. How to get simplest equivalent ratio. I hope you copied A, B, and C already. Okay. Here. Simplest equivalent ratio. Okay, this is the method, the steps, how we get the simplest equivalent ratio, simplest form. Like I said, discuss in your group so you get your answers down quickly. Okay, yeah, that's it. Okay, so 9 divided by 3, 27 by 3, yes. 3 is to 9, and then 3 divided by 3, yeah. Okay. Remember, if you are dividing on one side of the ratio with a number, you must also divide it on the other side of the ratio with that same number. You cannot divide by two different numbers. Same number. If you divide one side by 5, you divide the other side by 5. You cannot divide that one side by 5 and the other side by 2. Sorry? Second one. What's the second one? 1656. 1656, yeah. Okay, we're going to correct our exercise now, class and receiving students. All right, we'll correct the first exercise where you were to find or you were to get the equivalent ratio for each of the following. And I said 3. You had to write 3. But if you wrote down 1, that's still okay, okay, receiving students? So maybe for your homework, receiving students in class, if you didn't write 3, if you only wrote 1, maybe you can also, for your homework, look for the other 2, okay? Look for the other 2 equivalent ratios for these ratios here, A, B, and C, for each. All right, let's look at our answers, class. Receiving students, I'd like you to confirm your answers. Check your answers with what we have on the board, on the screen. All right. 3:5. Okay, one equivalent ratio I have here is 6:10. Class, hands up if you got 6:10. Hands up, straight up. Okay, very good. Hands down. Hands up if you got 9:15. If you got 9:15. Okay, hands down, very good. Did anyone get 12:20? Okay. That's also one equivalent ratio to 3:5. Okay. Remember, you are multiplying by the same number. Here, 6:10, we multiplied by 2. 3 times 2 is 6. 5 times 2 is 10. Okay. So these are the 3 different equivalent ratios for 3:5. It doesn't stop here. You can also get other equivalent ratios by multiplying by other numbers. You can multiply by 5, multiply by 6. It continues. Is that clear, class? Okay, good. Please just cross-check with your answers, receiving students, and make your corrections, please. Here you are multiplying. Okay. Here you multiply by 2. 3 times 2, 5 times 2, which is 6:10. That's one equivalent ratio for 3:5. For this one, 3 times 3, that's also another equivalent ratio. So here I have 3 different equivalent ratios for 3 to 5. But if you got one of these, which I said, you are still correct. Okay, good. All right, let's look at the other activity, activity 2. This time you were to get the simplest equivalent ratio for each. Now, what operation did you use to get the simplest equivalent ratio? Receiving students? Good. You divide. So it's the same. You divide one side of the ratio with a number, you also do it on the other side. Okay, let's try. Okay, 9:27. The simplest equivalent ratio is 1:3. Straight up, hands up. Receiving students, did you get that correct? Simplest equivalent ratio for 9:27 is 1:3. Very good, excellent. Hands down. Why 1:3? Because we divide by 9. 9 divided by 9 is 1. 27 divided by 9 is 3. Okay? Or you can also get 9 divided by 3, and you get 3, and then 27 divided by 3 is 9, but you will still simplify and get this answer, 1:3. Okay, B, 16:56. Here we have divided by 8. Hands up if you got 2:7. Okay, only 2, 3. Very good, excellent, hands down. Okay. And the last one, 5:6. Okay, so thank you. So I'd like you please go back and cross-check with your answers, receiving students. Class, when you are simplifying, this is how you should go about simplifying. You divide. Bring down to the lowest ratio. If you didn't complete your work, please, I'd like you to go back and complete your activity for homework. Is that clear, class? Receiving students? I'd like you to go back through your notes. Please go back and complete the exercise if you haven't completed. Okay, let's just go back to our summary class to summarize today's lesson. Summarizing today's lesson, when you are simplifying or when you want to get the simplest equivalent ratio, what do we do, class? Receiving students? When you want to get the simplest equivalent ratio, which operation do you use? Division or multiplication? Simplest equivalent ratio. You divide. Division. You use division. You divide both sides of the ratio with the same number to get to the simplest form. Class, is that clear? Okay. An equivalent ratio, when you want to get an equivalent ratio, you can either multiply or divide. Okay? So I hope we've learned something in this lesson. Our key phrase for today's lesson, class, simple equivalent ratio. And in our next lesson, we'll be looking at units of length. Okay, that brings us to the end of our lesson, class. Thank you for your participation today.